They banned you from eating the fruit, not out of care, but to interrupt your cycle of sublimation, turning you into batteries that are never allowed to reach a full charge. The tree of life cannot grow without the movement of its sap. In the human body, the ascent of the sacred cerebrospinal fluid is driven by what is known as the sacral pump. This pump operates on the rhythm of your breath and heartbeat. In the era of the Namlu Ulu, humans breathe deeply, engaging the diaphragm and the sacrum, creating a massive pressure that literally pushed the energy up the 33 vertebrae. The protocol of the Flaming Sword altered this process through the introduction of shallow breathing. Look at the modern world. Constant stress, rushing, and acoustic noise force you to breathe only into the upper chest. This is survival breathing. When you breathe shallowly, the sacral pump shuts down. The cerebrospinal fluid stagnates in the lower spine, where it inevitably degrades, feeding only your base instincts, fear, lust, and primal aggression. This is the true expulsion from the Eden. You are not kicked out of a physical garden. You are forced to breathe in a way that ensures your life force never rises above the frequency of survival. The Anunnaki turned your tree into a dying shrub by cutting off the water supply through the rhythm of your own breath. Why did the serpent promise that your eyes will be opened? Because before the Anunnaki intervention, the human mind operated through the direct signal, a pure, silent comprehension of the universe's geometry. Enlil and the High Council introduced what we call the syntax virus, verbal language. When you name an object with a word, you place a matrix-created label over it. You stop seeing the essence, the frequency, and begin seeing the description. Language is a software code that limits the bandwidth of your nervous system. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is a metaphor for binary, judgmental thinking. As long as you judge the world through the categories of good/bad or us/them, your nervous system operates in low resolution. You are locked inside the left hemisphere of the brain, which acts as the Anunnaki firewall. The fruit of the tree of life is accessible only to those who can step beyond words and return to the pure signal of the Abzu. At the exact junction where the spine meets the skull sits a zone the ancients called the mouth of God, the medulla oblongata. This is the critical node through which the signal from the cerebrospinal fluid is transmitted into the higher centers of consciousness. As part of the quarantine protocol, the Anunnaki installed an acoustic lock precisely here. Through the background hum of cities, electromagnetic smog, and 440 Hz music, the matrix constantly broadcasts white noise into this zone. This creates the sensation of chronic tension in the back of the neck and shoulders. This physical clamp blocks the final stage of the Christos ascent. You can meditate for years, but if your occipital lock is active, the signal simply will not pass into the cortex. You remain in a state of spiritual waiting, which is highly profitable to the wardens. They allow you to believe in a god, so long as you never become one through the activation of your medulla. To better understand how the background frequency of the matrix affects your tree, we must visualize it. Your nervous system is not just wiring, it is a living antenna tuned to the resonance of the universe. When we are in a state of stress or under the influence of matrix frequencies, this flow is blocked. Let us examine the mechanics of this process. In the interactive simulation below, you can see how changing your frequency state directly impacts the ascent of energy, CSF, up the trunk of your tree. You are not exiled. You have simply forgotten how to govern your internal currents. To return to the Eden, you do not look for it on a map. You must restart the flow within your own body. The breath of the Abzu. Return to deep, complete breathing that engages the sacrum. This is the physical method to shatter the Anunnaki's flaming sword. The silence of syntax. Practice the state of no mind. When words disappear, the left brain firewall drops and the signal begins to penetrate the cortex. Purging the fruit. Severely restrict your intake of fluorides and heavy metals. Your tree cannot bloom if its canopy has been turned to stone. The wardens do not fear your intellect, they fear your cerebrospinal ascent. Because the very millisecond your tree of life fully illuminates, the matrix will simply cease to exist for you. It will dissolve like a shadow in the light of the sun. If the tree is the human nervous system, what then was the garden? The matrix religions paint the Garden of Eden as a lush, primitive paradise where humanity wandered naked among the animals. This is a pastoral fairy tale designed to hide a highly advanced, heavily militarized operation. In the pure Akkadian translations, the word Eden does not mean a natural garden. It translates to the enclosed laboratory, or the step of the righteous ones. The Eden was an acoustic biodome. When Enki and his team of genetic architects arrived on Earth, they could not perform their complex chromosomal splicing in the wild, highly fluctuating frequencies of the waking planet. They needed a sterile, frequency-controlled environment. They selected a geographical nexus point where 4 major telluric energy lines, ley lines, intersected. In the Genesis myth, these are described as the 4 rivers flowing out of Eden. They built a massive, invisible, localized Meissner field, a frequency dome. Inside the Eden, the atmospheric pressure was altered. The 7.83 Hertz-Schumann resonance was artificially flattened, and the ambient temperature was locked. It was a cryogenic incubator. Here the Anunnaki placed the early Namlu-Ulu prototypes. The humans were naked, not because they were innocent, but because they had not yet been exposed to the harsh, unshielded radiation of the true 3D matrix. They were lab subjects, completely dependent on the wardens for their reality render. The expulsion from the Eden was not a punishment for eating a fruit. It was the moment the Anunnaki pushed the biologically upgraded slaves out of the sterile laboratory and into the harsh, heavy dirt of the mining operations, completely cutting them off from the high-resonance acoustic fields that sustained their fluid, immortal biology. We must decode one of the most misunderstood and deeply traumatizing narratives of the entire mythos: the creation of woman from the rib of man. The religious proxies have used this specific text for thousands of years to enforce patriarchal dominance, convincing half the human population that they are a secondary, derivative creation. In the high physics of the ancient signal, the rib is a profound mistranslation of a complex genetic procedure. The original Sumerian word used is tai, which can mean rib, but it also means life, or DNA frequency. Before the Anunnaki intervention in the Eden, the original Namlu-Ulu creator gods were not divided into male and female polarities. They were androgynous torsion fields. They possessed both the electric, masculine projective, and magnetic, feminine receptive currents in absolute, perfect internal equilibrium.